Good morning and welcome to our Women Wednesdays Entrepreneur Series. I'm Brandy Stitt, the Program Director for the Women's Business Center. And I'd like to welcome you this morning for our session. For those of you that have been participating, we host sessions every Wednesday on a variety of business topics that are intended to help businesses that have been impacted during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're covering a variety of topics from cash flow management, human resources challenges, social media, sales and marketing, WWES certification. If you've missed any of our previous sessions, they have all been recorded and are posted on our YouTube channel. This session is also being recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channel as well. It generally takes us about a week to get those posted, but we will let you know when those are available. This week's session is going to focus on operational strategies for profitability. Our presenter for this week is Mary Lou DeWald. She also presented last week's session on cash flow. Mary Lou is a professor at Ottawa University and the owner of Goodman & Bovey and a longtime supporter of the Women's Business Center by providing a variety of facilitations of training programs for us. So we're very happy to have her on board. So Mary Lou, I am going to hand it over to you. You have co-hosting abilities, so you should be able to share your screen, or I can share your slides if you'd prefer to do it that way as well.
Well, we'll see how this goes. If I can't, then we'll have you do it. So,
okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Feels like evening. I'm thinking that the day has barely started and it's already evening. So it's kind of the way the whole day is going. As Brandy indicated, I am a professor at the university, and so of course you can get kind of hung up in the analytical from the academic side of the house in a lot of cases, but my consulting work has kind of been focused in one area for my entire life, and that's in workouts and turnarounds, and that is trying to help businesses that are in serious trouble get out of serious trouble. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that most businesses, or many businesses, absolutely track the wrong numbers. They don't track what is actually capable of telling them when they are getting in trouble, about to get in trouble, getting out of trouble, whatnot. And the other thing is that they tend to not use the numbers in what I call close the circle, make a 360 with the numbers. So even if I can get them, or they are tracking because they know that they're supposed to, key indicators and key numbers, then they don't use the data that they get from them. And so one of the things that we want to try to do today is to get you to think about all the different myriad ways that we can come up with what are called key financial numbers, key financial indicators, key financial drivers, profit audits. There's lots of different ways that we look at this, and get you to think about what you need to pick and pull. The thing about today also is I'm going to be presenting concepts that you then have to go back and do some trial and error with, because there is no one singular set of key numbers for any individual business. And that's something that people want. Just tell me what the key number for my business should be. Well, the answer is no, because every business is slightly different. We can give you guidelines, and that's what we do today, but then you've got to go try it out. And if it's not giving you the data that you actually need, then maybe that's not the key number that you need to be tracking. And so if it doesn't work, then throw it out and try something else. But you need to think, and that's something I also see people not trying to do. What is it that I really need to be paying attention to in order to make my life simpler? And like I said, be that canary in the coal mine that's actually going to tell you a little bit beforehand when things aren't going quite so well. Now, the pandemic that we are currently in is such an anomaly that things turned south for many people very, very quickly through no fault of their own. But again, you can start tracking numbers that are going to tell you just how bad things are, or when things are starting to get a little bit better, so that you can be prepared in the future if something like this were to happen again. So welcome back, those of you that were with us last week, and welcome those of you that have not been with me before. Again, my name is Mary Lou, and I am very excited that you're going to be here with us for the next hour or so. Let's move right on into this. So for some of you, this next piece will be just a little bit of repeat of what we did last week. But again, I consider looking at profit and profitability extremely important, just as much as I consider looking at cash, which of course cash is king, is important. But this is, again, something that we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with and understanding exactly what all the parameters are when we're getting into looking at the business and how it actually runs. So we're going to start out today with a concept called the profit margin. And this is one of your old school calculations. You can consider it a ratio. Many people have many ratios that they actually use. But here's the equation. The profit margin is net income divided by sales. And so let's just think of a simple example here. If my sales for the year were $400,000 and my net income for the year was $100,000, what is my profit margin? Anybody want to put something in chat? So my sales are 400,000, my net income is 100,000. What would that give me? And Brandy, I can't get the chat so I can look and see. You're going to have to monitor that for
Yeah,
me.
there are no comments yet.
Okay.
One person wrote 100.
So 400,000 divided by 40,000 would be 100,000. That's right. Exactly. So percentage wise, what is that? 25%, right? If I'm doing the math in my head, right? Heavens.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's hope that you did. Yes. So is that good or bad? That's my question. Here's the question. What does it mean? Is 25% good or is 25% bad? Well, the answer always, or in most cases, is the magic words, it depends. And the problem is you've got to have something to compare it to. So if your profit margins, if you have been some consulting firm and your profit margins have been up around 30% or higher historically, then 25% may mean that your sales and your income and your way that you're operating is actually not as good from a profit standpoint as it has been historically. On the other hand, if my profit margin has only been around 10 or 15% because I am in retail or technology businesses of some description, and all of a sudden I'm up to 25%, it could mean that I have done things that are absolutely fabulous. So my whole point here is with profit margin is it's easy to calculate, but what it means is an entirely different set of parameters. And the importance, again, is that you are putting it in context for your specific business, not for all businesses in the bigger giant world, but you against yourself. And again, everybody goes out and gets their numbers and says, oh, well, the average business in my kind of category, if I'm a manufacturing firm, is 1% to 2%. Well, that may not be true for yours. Just because you're a manufacturing firm doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be for you. But you need to monitor this over time. And again, what you're hunting for and what you're looking for is the trending. So where is it going? Is it staying steady? Is it moving up? Is it moving down? And then you can get in and start looking at what's actually causing it by looking at what the piece parts are. So you've got two kinds of things in here. One is sales, which is literally how much money you brought in the door. That was pretty clean. So is that number trending higher, trending lower, trending flat? But the second one then is the net income. And it's the one that is much more variable and you have a lot more control over it. And one of the biggest things that people impact this with accidentally when they're not even really realizing that they're doing it and then suddenly they panic is that if you suddenly have an increase in just general operating expenses for the course of the year, then you're going to have very unhappy or unpleasant answer when you calculate your profit margin at the end of the year. Or if you have an anomaly, unusual expense that's going to come through, that's a one-off, it's also going to impact that. And so this may be a year in your trending that you can justify exactly why that number is not staying within trend, but you also, again, need to be looking at it so that you can determine whether that is the case or not the case. So my point being with this is you need to understand what is moving those numbers. Again, what's driving the numbers. This is the word you're going to hear me using constantly today. And what is actually making that number be what that number is. So something that first looks pretty simple and is one of those standard routine calculations that we always do. Actually, there is quite a bit more in the underlying scenario with that number. And again, the operative word here is drivers, and then the other operative word is trending. What is it doing over time compared to yourself? Last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. And those of you with heavy seasonality in your business, you also need to be doing interim profit margins along the way, because your profit is going to change based on whether this is high season, low season. And again, you need to understand that the average over the year may reflect anything that the business actually does at any given point in time. All right, so again, for those of you that were with me last week, you've seen this before. This is like one of my most favorite slides in the face of the planet, because I think, again, it actually gives you a real good feel for how each one of these parameters actually impacts profitability. And so, again, the key here is that what I want you to notice in this, at least for this talk today, is that there are two kinds of things in here. On the right-hand side of the slide, for the most part, you've got numbers that we are considered or can be considered calculable numbers. In other words, they're numbers that you're going to pull out of financial things for the most part. You can actually calculate costing on that side of the house. And then on the upper section of this are things that are intangibles. Actually, it is client expectation piece that is as influential on profitability as all of these things that I can calculate on this right-hand side that are, black and white, pretty much numbers created. And they tie together. For example, my client expectations fall down into the actual dollars billed and so on. And so again, no customer, no business is something that I say many, many times, but that expectation and that client satisfaction piece of the puzzle, and also the ability of that client to return. How often are they a repeat customer? Are they something that's going to be a one-off? Those sorts of things all play into your profitability. My hard example in this is, again, if I am a funeral home, how often do I serve a single individual in a funeral home? I have one chance to serve that individual, but I may have a chance to serve that family over time in multiple. So again, that experience can be very dependent on whether it's a singular or a more repeatable sort of scenario. If I'm a grocery store, on the other hand, people come into my store at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, kind of depending on where they are. And again, I have a lot more chances to meet or destroy their client expectations and get them to stay with you. And this whole piece here on this side, the direct labor, indirect labor over on the right side, is again looking at how much input we need from individuals. And we're going to talk about that a good bit today and how that influences profitability down the line. And that productivity and efficiency and effectiveness that we get into. And those, again, are things that some businesses are very good at looking at and maximizing the use of their resources in much better ways than others. But it's something that we all need to pay very close attention to when we are working through our issues with our numbers. So my whole point in giving you this is that even though when we get into this a little bit further and we look at KPIs and KPDs as distinctive individual entities and items, what I want you to fully understand is that there are so many more influences in the whole macro scheme of things that you need to pay attention to when you're working on this. So keep that in mind, and it will help you quite a bit in sorting out just how the profitability, the cash, the drivers that are going to give you that canary in the coal mine actually play out your business. So moving on, let's break our numbers out into 3 distinct types for a first way to break out and look at our numbers. And that is vanity numbers, bankable numbers, and critical financial numbers. So let's talk about this just a bit. The vanity numbers are the ones that basically, for the most part, give you bragging rights, is the easiest way I can think to describe that. It's something that you would get when you are going to a networking event and you collect business cards. So that was one that you met in the room, you got 37 business cards, but does it really, you can say, yes, I actually networked that room and did a really good job, but is it going to actually turn into anything? And that's the $1,000 question. Other examples of this that I hear a lot these days are YouTube views. How many Twitter followers do you have? How many Facebook likes? And again, that may drive some things, but again, is that really going to turn into anything? Don't get me wrong. It's important to have window shoppers, and the more visibility you get, the better. And it's just proof that your hard work is paying off. But if it's not tracking into something that's either bankable or a critical financial number, then maybe it's really not something that you need to be worrying all that much about. But it's these are easy numbers to count and figure out. And so people actually think that there's something to them in many cases. Second set of numbers are what I call bankable numbers. And these measure the actions that are taken by the members of your business. So these tend to give you a feel about sales funnel numbers, sales conversion numbers, and they tend to be ones that are, again, something that you can depend on. So for example, if you get 32 visits by independent individuals into your website on any given day, the bankable number out of the 32 is that 2 are going to convert. And over time, you've learned that this is the particular number. So you're taking that vanity number that people have actually come, but now you're turning it into a bankable number. And the only way that you know that, and the only way that you can do that, basically, is because the reason that you can do that is because you've learned over time. You've looked at the trends, you've looked at how these numbers actually turn into each other, and you know what that sales funnel looks like, and you know exactly when that happened and what the time frame is going to happen. So then and only then does it become a bankable number. Another kind of bankable number that you would have is what is the cost to actually acquire a new customer, and the time frame. So again, from the time that I first meet with someone until the time that they actually turn into a client, if that cycle is somewhere around 4 months, then I know at what point in time I can actually start counting on that contact to actually turn into something. But then the other thing I need to know and calculate along with that is what was the cost to actually acquire that new customer. So with them, how much did our time and energy and effort actually cost in order for us to get them to that particular point in time. All of those kinds of numbers fall into bankable numbers. And then, of course, the critical numbers, the critical financial numbers, these give you operational vital information. They measure efficiency, they measure profitability, they measure the likelihood of future success. And so our KPIs and KPDs that we're going to talk about extensively today, these all fall into this critical financial numbers piece. And then also others that fall into this are some of your ratios, although ratios sometimes are, like we said with the profitability ratio we started out with today, it's nice, but unless you're actually digging in and looking at what's driving those particular numbers, it's just a number. So I caution you a little bit with the critical financial numbers that even though you can create them and you can track them, you need to be very cautious that you're not just doing it because you can, but you're doing it because it's actually truly the first word in this line, the criticalness of it. Why are you tracking it and keeping close tabs on it? Is it actually telling you something that's going to allow you to make an informed decision? And we're going to talk about informed decision making a bit towards the end today. But again, these tend to be unique to each business. And just because your friend down the street runs a similar business and tracks X, it does not mean that X is going to give you what it is that you necessarily need in your business. So hopefully that's a way for you to really sort of take a minute, which is what I'd like for you to do now, to just sit down and look at what you track and rank them and put them into the 3 different categories. So take just a second, sit down and look at what you're currently tracking. And if you're coming up with a lot of yours being vanity numbers, that may or may not be a good sign. So I'll give you just a second to think about what you've got and where they fall out. All right, so hopefully you've done that. And let's move on. Let's talk about some of these key critical numbers that are actually ones that I think are kind of key critical numbers for businesses, big and small, regardless of the nature of the kind of business that they are in, that might be one that you're not tracking, that maybe you might want to consider making one of your key critical numbers. So the first one is what's called the chargeable ratio, and it is direct labor divided by your total labor, and it is a percentage. So basically what, again, we're trying to look at with this, depends on which industry you're in, but the benchmark is around 60% as it says here. But basically, how much in your cost of goods sold is another way to look this, is your individual workers' time being allocated. So I always use manufacturing firms as an example because everybody can kind of wrap their head around that. So think of the individuals that work in a manufacturing firm. You've got everybody from the person who is literally running the machine to the receptionist at the front desk that is answering the phone. So if we look at the direct labor cost, the individual on the machine is actually going to be close to 100%, or at least they should, because their work and their labor that's going into the manufacturing process is absolutely a part of the cost of goods sold. On the other hand, I've got the individual that's sitting at the front desk, the receptionist individual, where basically none of their labor hour is actually going to go into the cost of the product unless I allocate a tiny portion in there. And so what I'm looking at over the whole of my company is somewhere around 60%. So if you're in an architectural firm, for example, yours should be well above that, because most of your labor hours that are involved in that, you still may have the receptionist individual, but again, much like that manufacturing term, most of your individuals should actually be inside the chargeable ratio as a direct labor hour. I know some of you are in technology type firms and software development firms. You're much like an architectural firm, so that chargeable ratio should be very much higher than that 60% overall. And especially if you're hiring contract labor to do specific things, their labor should be up around 90 to 95% at a minimum of their billable hours is actually being directly charged back to the total labor cost of that project that you're doing. That one gives you a very quick feel for, do you have idle time? And again, idle time is something when we're looking at this as a decision on, do I need to get rid of someone? Do I possibly need to lay off individuals? Do I actually need to hire individuals? That's one of the reasons that we look at the chargeable ratio so closely. Second one is multiplier achieved. And this is your operating revenue divided by your direct labor. All right. So it gives you a dollar spent, gives you kind of a dollar spent sort of thing. So for the example here, they're saying that the multiplier is 245. So that if a firm earns $2.45 for every dollar spent on direct labor, then again, that may be very, very good. So you're getting a nice multiple. You're getting a 245 multiple. But as I said earlier, the key operative here is, again, it depends. Depends on how it ties back into the overall bigger picture. And so again, you want to be cautious with this, that you don't just look at a multiple and it looks great. If it's not your multiple, and it's not a consistent multiple, and it's not a multiple that's staying as good as it is or getting higher, then again, what that's doing is telling you and forewarning you that things may or may not be exactly like you want them to be. Third one that I think is important that people pay attention to, and many companies don't, is your overhead rate, which is your general overhead plus your payroll burden plus your indirect labor divided by the direct labor. All right. So again, lower overhead rates are in service firms for the most part, but it again is something that you need to look at over time and get a feel for what yours is. And then what you're actually, again, looking for is it going up? And what I see happen with particularly service-oriented businesses is that they were working from the home or they were working from the poor, tiny little office. And then all of a sudden they feel the need to go and get the really nice office. And the question that I always ask is that necessarily making your business more efficient, more effective, or more productive? And the answer typically, in some cases, maybe yes, because they were in horrible working conditions. But in general, the answer is probably no. And so what you've just done is you've accepted a burden that maybe you don't necessarily need. Classic, perfect example right now is, and they just went out of my head, the company in Seattle, REI. The company that does sports equipment, beautiful new financial campus that they were getting ready to move into. They were almost ready to move into it. You can't imagine the amount of money that they've spent on it. And then the COVID-19 crisis hit. They sent everybody home, and what they discovered is their productivity has actually gone up. And not just that, but the overhead rate, of course, has gone down. And so they're sitting there going, we don't need this beautiful building to run our company. We're going to spread out into just a few smaller buildings and let pretty much everyone work from home, because this is working really well. We're saving incredible amounts of money. That would be created by calculating their overhead rate. And you better believe anybody was doing that when they suddenly decided that this is the decision they're making to sell their brand new campus that most people had not even moved into. All right, the break-even multiplier, again, is your overhead divided by your direct labor plus 1. And so if it's, again, what you were looking at is how many labor hours do I actually have to break even? So again, what we typically look at is for break even is what is it in dollars in sales, or what is it in number of units that I have to produce. But this is a little bit different way to look at it. And this is looking at it from a profitability standpoint. So again, it's not true break even, but it's called a break even multiplier because it's getting at that same point. I like this one a lot because I'm a big fan of break evens. They very quickly will tell you how you're doing and where you need to be. And then of course you can incorporate into them, I want X amount of profit over time. And you can then start working towards that figure rather than just running towards break even, which means I'm just going to cover my costs and nothing more. The billing multiplier is also a good one. And this includes profit goals beyond break even. This is much like what I call break even plus profit. But again, what you're doing is you're actually including the amount of profit that you want into your actual calculations. Just a different way of wording this than saying break even plus profit, because that confuses many, many people. But again, I think this is critical and important because again, it is telling you very quickly what it is that you really need to do to profitability for. And the last one is our operating revenue per. So you take everybody, not just the people that are direct labor. Again, this is looking at everybody and comparing them to industry benchmarks or to yourself. And so these are all out there. The place that you can find the standards for your industries are in two places. One is Standard & Poor's, runs sets of these fairly regularly. And those books can be found at the Johnson County Library. The other one is Dun & Bradstreet, has some of these in it. The D&Bs, again, give you feel over time of what industry averages are and what they're not, and how you can actually work through those. And so the bottom line is, again, if you have a very strong industry association, such as the one that I always use as an example because they're just fabulous, is the hardware industry. They can tell you everything about running hardware firms that you'd ever possibly want to know. Some are better than others, but they will have what is industry average general for these. And again, my caution though is while you do want the industry averages, you want to make sure that you're not just trying to live up to the average, that you're actually trying to be better than the average, and you only picking and choosing out of these the ones that are actually going to tell you whether you're being more profitable, more efficient, more effective, and more productive. Okay. All right, so here's my statement that I make everybody repeat after me 8 million times. No customer, no business. I want you to sit there and make that one of your mantra statements because it is one of those things that's just really, really key. No customer is no business. And so again, just making the customer happy does not mean that you're going to keep them as a customer for a long time. And it also means that you may have the most fabulous product in the world, good or service as well. But if they're not coming and buying it, then it's basically a moot point. You're not going to stay in business very long. Again, think of a restaurant that you've gone to where you thought the food was absolutely fabulous, probably some of the best, maybe even the service was nice, but they didn't get a following. They're out of business. Doesn't matter that they had fabulous food and better than the average restaurant down the street. The fact that the customer did not return for whatever reason means that they are no longer in business. Okay, so we're going to get into a little exercise here on what's called a profit audit. And one of the things that we look at with the profit audit, and the reason that we are so interested in using and doing a profit audit, is that not only do you need to be looking at the company from a whole, which is what we just did in the last summary, where we're kind of focusing on the labor and piece of it, but we also need to look at it by our product line or service line. So for the average business, you can break, or you should break, all of the things that you do in general categories. Some people break it out. In this case, it's literal product. We have 3 products, A, B, and C. Others break it out into geographic areas. Again, it depends sort of scenario. What is most logical and best for you? But what you're trying to do here and what you're looking for in this case is what you're hoping to find then is, where am I actually making my money? And a lot of times, once you start allocating, which is what this requires you to do, all the costs within the business back to the products themselves, you suddenly discover that the contribution that one of the products is giving you is much better than the contributions that the ones you thought were actually making you the money were making you. And so if we run our eyes across here, by far the most sales are coming out of product B. And again, for this example, in our percentages that are running down the right-hand side, this is called common size. Percentages run off of sales for each column. So in other words, if I'm looking at product B, my 1,426,664 is my 100%. So if I scan my eyes down to the contribution margin at 658 into my 1,426 is my 46.2%. And on down. So if we scan our eyes all the way down to the bottom, that particular product is producing from a profit margin 100,983, which is 7.1% of my 1,426. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. It's hard to see or tell when you're doing a webinar. But if we look at it across the bigger picture, then what we see is that the profit margin on product A is a whopping 21%, and the product margin on product C is actually a loss. So in other words, we are not making any money, profit, on product C. And so what we did was we went in and we allocated the literal sources and uses and resources that we are using in each one of these product areas back across how they actually are being produced. And this is what we came up with. And then here's some notes down at the bottom for you. Product A is a niche item with little competition. Product B is a leader in broader, more competitive markets. And product C is a version of B modified for a small business market. So my question to you, and I want you to put this in chat for me, is what should the company do? So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes. What should they do? If they see this, what are their options and what should they actually do? So Brandy, we have any suggestions in chat yet?
Nothing in chat yet.
Okay. They're being quiet today. Okay, so for sake of time, I'm going to have to go on. So here's some suggestions, all right? We can sell product C to a competitor. We can phase out product C and its related overhead costs over time. But what happens is if we first phase out product C, we're still going to have to take those overhead costs and allocate them back to product A and product B. And that may not necessarily do for us what we actually want the overall net to be better to do for us. And the other thing here is that product C, since it's specifically for the small business market, may actually drive sales of product A. We don't have that information in here, or product B, but it may be something like, think of, oh, if I'm a store and I'm selling raincoats and I have a display of raincoats, I may also have this display of umbrellas right next to it, because if I'm buying a raincoat, maybe I need a new umbrella as well. Well, I'm there to get them to buy the raincoat, and that's where I'm going to actually make my money. But I can also pick up a little bit more or better sales by having the umbrellas presented. So it's a total package, and even though I'm losing money on that umbrella, which is in this case, the example would be product C, it is driving them to buy my product B. Does that make sense to everyone, I hope? So what you need to be cautious of is, just because you've got a column or a group that is losing money, the question is, can you actually get rid of it, as the options and examples say here, and still actually keep generating revenue in the other two categories at the rate that you currently are? And keep in mind also that that overhead has to go somewhere, unless you literally are able to isolate it, eliminate it, and get rid of it in some way, shape, or form so that no one ever sees it again. Another example would be if these products are so distinctly independent from each other that you can actually sell off a whole unit. So the product C would be a unit, and when I sell it, not only do I sell it, but I'm able to sell off all of its overhead and expenses relatable to that. If I chop it off and make it all go away, then I would increase my profitability. But I also, again, would have impacted sales. Sales are going to be less next year, but I may actually be more profitable in the business as a whole. So if you are not doing profit audits in your company, I strongly, strongly encourage you to use this as one of the tools that you do. Again, once you set this up, it's very easy to go back and look and see where you stand. You're, again, looking for trends. And you're also looking for changes over time. And the cool thing is, once you start breaking this out, if you actually focus in on a particular product and try to increase and create greater sales in a particular area, the cool thing about this is you can very, very quickly isolate and tell whether your directed sales efforts are actually paying off. Whereas if you're keeping everything in a whole, as that whole business entity, and running all your ratios as a total, you sometimes can't tell whether your efforts and your work and your attempts in that area have actually done anything worthwhile. And so again, profit audits are one of the first things that you need to break out in your company and try to do when you're looking at operational effectiveness overall. Okay, we're going to continue on here. Rest of the time today, or the next section, we're going to talk about KPIs and KPDs. This is something that people, I think in many cases that they know and they understand, but in a lot of cases I think they get them very mixed up. They're very muddy. There's also called a KPM, which is a key performance measure, and the KP is just very, very confusing for many, many people. So hopefully in this next section, what we're going to do is clean up a little bit of this and get you understanding a little bit better what is right and what is wrong, and what is actually helping you and what is not helping you as much as you had thought. So let's move on. KPD is a key performance driver, all right? And so the example that we have here is checkout. So when a shopper exits before completing an order and leaves items in their cart, that would be what is called checkout abandonment. So if it's typically 10% and then suddenly goes to 15%, maybe that's an indicator of one of these other things. That is a key performance driver. In and of itself, it's not telling you that much, but it is driving other things. So the kicker here is that this particular driver is probably indicating that you're having a decrease in sales. And so the metrics that KPDs are measuring, it's a business process or a value stream, but it's not the actual bottom line calculation, the ratio, the number that you are using. It's something that is telling you that something else is going to happen that you then turn around and measure. My best example of a KPD, and the one that I love the most, is in the restaurant industry. So I want you to take just a second and tell me or think about what you think the single most important KPD for a restaurant would be. Using this example that we just used of how one drives another, what is the driver that I am hunting for if I am in a restaurant? What do you think? And don't think about it in financial terms. Typically, these are not numbers. They are a value number, if that makes sense. All right. The key performance driver for a restaurant is what is known as buns in seats. Now stop and think about that for a second. What is known as a limiting factor? So question number one in your own business, what is my limiting factor? What are the limiting factors within my business? And what we want to know then is in the restaurant then, my limiting factor is how many chairs I can put someone in my restaurant. So if I have 100 chairs, my limiting factor is 100 patrons. So I am looking for some portion of that number for my lunch crowd, my breakfast crowd, my dinner crowd, whatever. And it is a very easy down and dirty number to track. Then what drives off from it, some of the KPIs and other things that drive off then are average check size, average amount of food that's used, all of those sorts of things. But they're all driven by the fact that that person sat down in that seat in the first place. And so instead of looking at all that secondary stuff, just look at the primary piece. And over time, I can very quickly say the average on Tuesday is 80. And all of a sudden, my average on Tuesday is down to 60. Something is going on. And I can catch that very, very quickly because then it is going to then filter through all of my KPIs, all the other indicators. They're the ones that are going to be impacted. And I'm going to notice that there's a decrease at the register. But it's being driven by the fact that there is not a customer sitting in that seat. All right. And so the key here is there financial or non-financial terms. Honestly, this is a non-financial term. This is a butt in a seat, a bun in a seat. So think of that. And so most people are trying to make these way too hard, and they never actually get to the KPD that is critical for their business because they get stuck with one of the indicators that gets kicked off because of the KPD. So think back to what I said at the very start of this presentation. This is trial and error. One of the things that you've got to get in and look at is what is the one or two, and yes, it is literally one or two KPDs that can forewarn and be that canary in the coal mine for my business and tell me ahead of time what is actually happening in my business before it actually happens. All right. Now, KPDs are one of those things that can be in a number of different areas. And so we break them down into basically three different categories. They again are leading indicators, but they are going to lead in one of three different ways. They are either operational in their leading. So in other words, they are telling you something about the operations of the business. They are financial drivers, which again is basically looking at whether I'm running out of cash in a lot of times, or they're telling you that I need to go out and borrow money, or I need to take on more debt. Those are kind of the financial things. And again, if I am in a high growth scenario, those financial drivers are the ones that I need to pay attention to, because again, what does a company eat when it is growing? Those financial drivers is something that I need to pay attention to. And the third way that you can break these out in these KPDs is what's called sustainability drivers. And so again, with sustainability, we're looking at long-term processes within the business. So when do I actually need to increase the size and the footing of my building, and how far out do I expect that to go? Where can I cut something like environmental regulations, not cut, but enhance or improve, where I'm going to have to spend on them, I guess. Those, again, are those sustainability things that over time, again, I can come up with drivers that are going to trigger that. All right, now I'm going into a different set of laws and regulations, and that's going to drive more expense for me at this particular point in time. So the bottom line here, and this is the most important thing, they are proactive rather than reactive. And that's the word that I want you to know and understand. They proactively identify the processes and the risks. So again, funds and seats. I am proactively, literally counting the number of people that are walking in at any given point in time. And because I am able to do that, then I can turn around and come up with game plans based on not order much food next Tuesday as I always do, because for some reason our Tuesdays are down or whatever. And then finally, from a performance dashboard perspective, KPDs are instrumental in performing cogent what-if analysis. Playing crystal ball, and if you all don't have a crystal ball handy, you really probably need to get one, because it is important that everyone be always playing what if. And again, in strategy and in informed decision making, this is one of the things that we work on consistently with individuals, is getting them to play the what if scenarios. And I also call it if then. So if A happens and it doesn't work out quite like you want it, B, C, or D may be your outcomes. So for example, let me give you one that tends to be something that people can wrap their head around a little bit. I am a company and I need to cut costs, because I just need to cut costs for whatever reason. We won't get into all that. But the bottom line is, one of the fastest ways I can cut costs is I could lay someone off. I will get an instant reward for laying that person off because I no longer have to pay their salary. Everybody is clear with that. So short term, I get exactly what I want. So I have a win-win. It's called intended strategy versus realized strategy. And I'm getting what I want. I need to cut costs. I lay somebody off. I'm freed up $100,000 that I didn't have before. The world's a happy place. But the what if scenario is, well, because I laid them off, what is actually going to happen? What are the other unintended consequences of doing that? Well, if that person was a salesman, then the bottom line is I may lose up to 15% of all of my customers who were his clients because they absolutely loved him. They didn't love our business, they loved him. And because he is no longer servicing their account and I can't get someone else in there fast enough because I laid him off to service that account, that individual may go choose another business to go work with because they're not happy with us that we laid off their salesman that they absolutely love. So in a little bit longer term scenario, and again, it kind of depends, yes, I get exactly what I wanted. I get a cost cutting in the shorter term, but as I start stretching it out, I'm going to lose some of that goodness that I got out of it, because now I'm starting to lose customers because of that same impact. So again, KPDs can help you work through those scenarios and help you work through the different things that may actually happen when you end up making a decision like this. So hopefully that helps you a little bit in understanding that these are drivers. They are proactive. They allow you to play what if, and all of the KPI stuff is going to actually stem out of this. They are distinctly different creatures. So for service firms, here are just some examples, again, that professional organizations tend to use sometimes for their KPD. It's annual revenue per billable consultant, annual revenue per employee. We talked about those again as critical numbers before. Billable utilization, project overruns, profit margins. And again, each one of these we could go through in great detail. But billable utilization, again, is back to literally playing kind of one of those fun games. How many hours in the year does the individual actually have the ability to bill out as an individual when you're in a service firm, and how much of that are they actually doing? So you can get down to literally in the course of the year, there's 2,040 or 2,080, I can never remember, possible billable hours in a scenario where someone's working 40 hours a week. So if we cut off 2 weeks of that, we've cut off 80 hours. So now we're down to 2,000. I'll just do that. But then I send them off to training for 4 weeks. I cut off another 80 and they're down to 1920 billable hours and so on down the line. And so what it looks like at first is that I had this nice big over 2,000 rate of ability to use this person. But in reality, by the time I cut everything off and, oh, they were sick for 2 more weeks and yada, yada, the bottom line is I may be at roughly 50 to 60% billable utilization. This one is great because it is, again, something that you can track very, very quickly. Now, my one comment is I have seen firms where their billable utilization rate is over 100%, which means that they are billing for more than the standard 40-hour work weeks. And again, if that's what you do, that's what you do. Attorneys are very notorious for having extremely high billable utilization rates, and the expectation is that they run over 100% with 24/7 basically to actually pull that off. But again, keep that in mind, that that is one that tends to give you a very good feel and is very much like the bun in the seat. Stop and think about that. What is your limiting factor in a service firm? Your limiting factor in a service firm is the fact that you have a billable hour. And once that hour is gone, it is also known as perishable. And what perishable basically means is that once it's gone, it's gone. So again, my example to use for this is think of an airplane. When that airplane takes off, those seats, if there is not a bun in the seat, much like the restaurant, they will never be able to recoup the ability to put a bun in that seat, because when that airplane took off, the product died, if that makes sense. Same thing in service firms. You only have X amount of hours that you can bill. And once that hour is passed, you cannot go back and recruit that billable hour. Project overrun is something that also I would encourage you, if you are a service related firm, regardless of the nature of the service, to pay attention to. And that is exactly looking at your budgeted costs to your actual costs. And so again, how much are you over? If you are consistently running over, then you're probably not pricing. We're not even going to get into pricing today very much, but pricing, again, may be something that you are not doing very well. And again, what that's hurting, bottom line, is that's hurting your profitability down the line. Now, if you're bidding and you're underbidding to try to get the project in the first place, you're going to have a lot of project overrun. So again, you might want to be looking at the project overrun as a ratio. That would be something that you can pay attention to and look and use. And again, of course, we get into profit margin. Profit margin is kind of the one that for professional service firms or service firms is something that everyone needs to be paying attention to. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of these that you could start with and play with. But again, my comment to you is with your KPDs, 1 or 2, maybe 3 are all you want to try to get down to looking at and using, because you can get too many of them. And if you get too many of them, then you're going to have problems with too much information. And that's as bad as not enough information. Or then you'll get into what I talked about at the very beginning, where you're actually looking at information that is not helpful to you and is not the information that's actually going to give you what you need to have. Okay. All right, let's get into KPIs. So these are the numbers that are produced as a result of the KPD. So back to my example with the restaurant, the bun in the seat is the driver, but the KPI would be the cost per ticket. Okay, or an example that I've given you here The KPI is booking 8 calls per day. But the critical driver in getting those eight calls is the advertising dollars that you actually spent in. So in other words, if I spend $10,000 in advertising, I know that that typically spins off X amount. So if I'm spending that and I'm not getting my KPI of 8, hopefully I can do something very quickly to rectify that so that I don't throw my money away. In other words, maybe I'm spending my advertising. Historically and trend wise, this is what I've always gotten as a KPI out of that spend. If suddenly that is not actually what I'm getting out of that spend, then possibly I need to reassess and look at what I actually should be getting out of it. At the bottom, I've put a link here. It is way more than 18 key performance indicators in this web link, but it is a fabulous article that just goes on and on and on about all the different types of KPIs that companies can use. And I think you'll find it very helpful if you use that particular article. So again, people understand the KPIs, which also are called KPMs, which is key performance measure in a lot of cases, because these are the little metrics that everybody plays with all the time. These just seem to be much more comforting to people. People understand them better, and they just are not as fluffy, I hate to use that word, as a KPD. But to me, the one that's more important is the KPD, because I can do the calculations all day long, but I need to nail what my driver is. The driver is the thing that causes everything else to happen. And the KPI is just the measure that I'm getting out of the backside. So the one drives the other, and that's the key important thing. So I pulled some for a technology firm, just as a reference. So again, ones that KPIs for a technology firm would be, once you've got that driver figured out, would be revenue growth rates, customer acquisition costs, burn rates. And again, this one is kind of unique or special with technology firms, but the burn rate is how quickly are you actually running through the money that you have in your particular business. How much money do you actually use? So it's actually back kind of to a break-even sort of concept, if that makes sense. But in the industry, they tend to call the break-even sort of thing right. So basically, if I spend $50,000 a month to run and operate business, I have $500,000 in the bank. I'm just making something up. Then the bottom line is my burn rate would be roughly 10, if that makes sense, which means I've got 10 months until I'm out of cash. So again, it's kind of a forward-looking thing. Again, back to that crystal ball piece of the puzzle, which is what KPDs do for you. But again, you can monitor and measure that and make sure that you're doing what you need. Customer retention, extremely critical in technology firms and in service firms in general. Again, that retention rate, how many times do they re-up? How long do you actually keep them? There are calculations for this. And again, basically you look at the number of customers at the period's end minus the number of customers that you acquired during the period divided by your sales, the number of customers at the beginning of the period. So number of customers at the end minus number of customers acquired divided by number of customers at the beginning, and that gives you a percentage. You multiply it by 100. And again, you can find this out on the internet without much trouble. But again, what is that retention rate? And again, something that you can look at pretty darn quickly and get a feel for. Okay, we run around 90% as average, and now we're suddenly down to 80%. We are not retaining like we used to. What are we doing different? The other one is lifetime value of the customer. And again, this gets back to how often and how long they stay. And that is something that it depends again, and I hate to use the it depends, like people get very frustrated, but each individual business, your lifetime with that customer is going to vary because you are in a different kind of business. Just that. for 100 years. But on the other hand, if it is something where I'm going to stay with someone for 10, 15 years, I'm losing them at 6 months all the time, then you've got a problem. So again, it's all relative. That's the caution here, but you do need to know what that is. So the last one here, the customer experience, which is called the Net Promoter Score, we're going to get into in great detail. All right. And it again is one of those that is kind of a cool one. And it gets back to, again, if you remember our chart that I showed you on the fact that the customer experience and the no customer, no business piece of the puzzle, that customer satisfaction is pretty much one of those big things. And in service-related businesses, it's one of the biggest ones, all right? So let's walk through this one a little bit because a lot of people just don't ever pull this up. It's kind of a down and dirty again. And again, that's the thing with all of these numbers, they are not precise. Don't try to make them precise. You'll drive yourselves crazy if you try to do that. They are indicators. And they move and they vary, but what you need to pay attention to is consistency in the way that you do stuff, trending over time. And as long as you're consistent, even if you're wrong, if you're consistent, then you're going to get something you can compare it yourself to. So you ask your customers on a scale of 1 to 10 these questions. How likely is it that you would recommend your brand or whatever to a friend or colleague? Then you ask them, and they respond as follows. Promoters are loyal enthusiasts who will keep buying and referring others and fueling growth. Passives, who are the ones in the middle, are satisfied but unenthusiastic customers who are vulnerable, can't say the word, vulnerable, still can't say the word, to competitive offerings. And then finally, they may fall into the detractors, 0 to 6. They're unhappy and they will damage your brand and impede your growth down the line. All right. So what you want to do is run this on a regular basis. And then the final thing is that you can have a range of 0 to 100, depending on if you're looking at, say, 10 individuals. And I think this is an extremely important metric because it tracks the changes in your customer's experience over time, all right? And it's not really, again, an absolute value. It is an indicator or an indice, but it can quickly tell you if you've changed or shifted the way that you are operating or the way that you are interacting with your customers. It will very quickly, if you regularly do this, give you a feel for whether things that you are implementing are working or they're not working. And again, this is an indicator. This is a KPI, not a KPD. So this one's considered a metric, even though it's, like I said, sort of this abstract piece of the puzzle. But again, it's also something that if you're consistently running this, then you over time of what new things that you are doing are working or new things that you are doing are not working. And that is really what you're after in the end is, are my actions actually making a difference? Are they helping me get things done in a better way or not? So again, let's wrap up with understanding how the KPDs impact the KPIs. I think we've basically already talked through this pretty well. But again, just a few more little hints and things between the two. And I put this as the sidebar on this one because to me, again, this is the big thing. You aren't focusing on the KPIs and the KPDs themselves. What you are focusing on and what you want to pay attention to is what is the numbers and the numeration behind them and how are they interacting with each other, and keeping in mind that the D drives the I. The D's drive the I's, and that's the important, all right? So I've said it 100 times before today, but I'll say it one more time. They need to be consistent. You need to, even if you're wrong, that's okay. If it's not following norms and parameters that are normally the way that norms and parameters are run in your particular industry or business, that is absolutely, totally okay, as long as you are consistent. And again, what you're looking for is what area and what things are really the important pieces of the puzzle within your business, all right? And again, the KPIs are the calculated piece, but the drivers are the actionable information. And again, historical data is great. And that's what all of our financial statements are. They are historical, sometimes hysterical, but mainly historical in nature. But they are exactly that. They are looking back. And that's what KPDs are trying to do. They are trying to, again, do crystal balling for you so that you can make informed decisions and decision making moving forward. And then finally, this is my concern and caution with this. People try to do too many. They try to do way too many of them at any given point in time. And what ends up happening, absolutely, is you get analysis paralysis. And so the bottom line is you just refuse to do anything because you just can't figure out what the numbers are, or because you could create all this data, you create all this data, and then you just start ignoring the data entirely. And that is probably as bad as not doing it in the first place. So when I go in and work with businesses that are in serious financial trouble, the bottom line is, for the most part, they may have exactly the information that they need, but they are flat out not using it. And they're just looking at it. And sometimes I think it's because individuals are too close to it. They're just too close to that information and that data, and they aren't seeing what it's clearly trying to tell them. The way a business talks to you is through its numbers. It's the only way it knows how to talk to you. And some of the numbers are a metric, they're like a KPI, but many of the numbers are a KPD. They are a concept. And that key operative word again is driving. What is driving this number to be created? What is driving this data metric to happen? And figuring out those one or two drivers will then again allow you to be so much more proactive within your particular business. So again, if we look at and what we monitor, we've got two different things coming in here. We've got our drivers and our KPDs that are alerting us on the analyze side of the house. And then on this side, we have what most people are very used to in the lower half, and that is our old-fashioned business planning process. And the two work in concert with each other. And then in theory, if you're doing it right, they will come, you will get off, you'll get a variance, you'll get something that happens, then this is the individual need interpretation, then you need to act, and you need to actually change something because of that. So the KPIs and the KPDs are acting kind of as your forewarning system, and the bottom half of it is I've got my overall business plan and my planning and my budgets in place, and the two working in concert with each other are how we actually try to move a business forward and make those informed decisions. So the whole bottom line then is to utilize both sides of the house. It's an integrated set of things that we use when we do strategic planning, and not just strategic planning, but the strategy of informed decision making, which is one of the key critical things that businesses have a very hard time doing, is being able to actually make what we call informed decisions. And so again, it's looking at all the piece parts. I actually teach a class in strategy at the university for seniors. And the bottom line is when they walk in the door, I tell them that I'm not going to teach them new. They've had that in all of their different classes, in their finance class, their marketing class, their management class, whatever. What we're going to teach them how to do is how to make a decision, and how to make that decision as an informed decision. And I take it one step further and I actually tell them I'm literally going to teach you how to think. And so that is where good business individuals are using those key metrics and those key pieces of data and not getting overwhelmed with all of the financial data that's in front of them, to be able to then make those decisions and be comfortable with that decision and move forward when that decision is actually executed. So there are 4 steps in making a good, solid, informed decision. All right. The first is acquiring, organizing, and disseminating appropriate and accurate information. So it's again filtering. That's the word I can use with this that I think is the best. In other words, do you know what data is actually the data that you need to be paying attention to? And again, hindsight and wisdom and looking back and knowing from a time is fantastic when you're a new business. You don't have quite that history, but getting hung up with, well, we've always done it this way, does not help you in this process. And then making sure that the right people in the organization also know this information and know how to acquire and create this information. Then you need to create a customized decision support team. So who is it that's going to back you up when you make this decision, and how do they do that? And it may not be the people that you first think would be the ones that are going to support you in that decision and look at you in that decision. But again, it's up to you again to create a culture within your business. And we haven't really talked about culture though, but a culture in business that supports and embraces informed decision making. All right, and then you establish a threat and opportunity early warning system. So again, playing crystal ball and figuring out what are your canaries in the coal mine that are telling you when something is not going the way that it should. That's what we've been talking about for the last hour. Picking and choosing these piece parts that are going to be the ones that really actually help you do that. And as much as anything, it allows you, again, to be on top of stuff rather than reacting to all the crises. And then make this decision rapidly. Don't sit on it. Don't masticate and chew on it until you're blue in the face. Take your data, take your information. And what I say with this always is 70% is good enough. If I think that I have 70% of the information out there that could impact this decision in any way, shape, or form, then I am fine. Because finding that additional 30% of the data in rare instance might change my decision, but probably it isn't. It's just going to be some other iteration of the information that I already have and already am capable of accessing and using. And so again, the key important piece in this puzzle is that you are making that decision and that you're making it in a timely fashion and not letting that data get old and not letting it sit there to the point that something else is going to happen because you just flat refuse to make the decision. So strategy depends on critical factors. And it's basically, I put the puzzle piece in here because this is exactly what we're looking at. If you think about that last big picture slide that I looked at, it's a combination. It's an alignment of your company with the external environment. You know, how am I aligned with that? Am I paying attention to the things out there that impact my business the most? And of course, we call this either, pest or steeple or some of the other different things and external environmental impacts. And again, when I work with businesses, one of the biggest things that they don't know many times that they should know is how is their business impacted by external environmental factors. And so if you aren't doing this kind of analysis and you don't know what is key and critical and how these impact your business, I strongly encourage you to look at that piece of the puzzle. It's always coupled with the internal. Your core competencies. What is it that your business does that is really, really good? And what is it that your business does that gives you that competitive advantage? And a competitive advantage, again, is the uniqueness that your business has that other businesses do not have. And it can be a combination of things. It may not be that your product, good, or service is any different than anybody else's, but it's the way that you bring that to market. And then finally, it's careful implementation and monitoring of all of the data that we use. So think of this as big picture. Think of this as how this puzzle piece is sitting here. I am touching the external world. I am managing the internal world. And then I am taking all of that data from both internal and external and figuring out what my KPIs and my KPDs are. And I'm actually acting and using those to make my business better. So just to recap, we're at the end and I want to wrap these up again. Your influences for informed decision making come from two places. They come from financial sides of the house, and then they also come, more importantly, from non-financial. And people tend to just want to look at the financial data again because it's easy. I can look at all of these things. I can come up with them. I would actually argue that KPDs are non-financial, but everybody calls them financial, so we'll leave this here. But am I looking at the key ratios that I need to look at? Am I paying attention to my pricing? Are my KPDs and my KPIs the ones that I need to actually be paying attention to? And then, of course, from the non-financial side of the house, how am I doing on productivity, the client expectations, which I can't talk about enough. Again, I keep saying it over and over and over because it's so important. No customer, no business. And then the productivity and the efficiency of the business. Do I have the people in place that can actually do the job at the highest level possible to make my use and my investment into them or into their work process an efficient and effective way of operating business? So again, I can find a metric or a driver for every single one of these that will help me then make my decisions in a much better way. And bottom line is, once you figure this out, doesn't mean that it's set in stone and you're never going to change it again. But it sure will make your life simpler, because you know from history and you know from understanding that if I'm watching these 2 or 3 things and I act when I need to act, then things tend to go in a very good way. And so that's the ending thing that we're going to talk around. You take all of this and you formulate internal process numbers or do what you need to have them do. Because the bottom line is, you only have a finite amount of time to make these decisions and move business forward. And so you don't want to be spending all of your time in your day and your effort monitoring the numbers. There are, instances and examples of large, super large companies. One of them is Bill Gates. When Bill Gates was actually running his company day in and day out, doing actual day-to-day operations, they would provide him with a sheet that had 4 numbers on it every day. It took him 10 minutes to go through those numbers, and he knew exactly where they stood on any given day. Because as big as that company is, and as big as that company was when he was growing it, he figured out what his KPIs and his KPDs are, and he was able to do that. Warren Buffett is another one. Warren Buffett spends very little time actually running and managing his company because he has figured out what his drivers are, and that allows him to then turn around and focus on more important things and to actually have a life and to move forward. And he's done really well. But the bottom line is, it's not pouring over silly amounts of data to try to ferret this out. It's having that data do what that data should be doing for you, and that is guiding you to make the informed decisions that then will turn around and grow the company.
Mary, really quickly, I just want to jump in with a question. There was a question, what were those numbers Bill Gates looked at?
I don't know, because they've never actually disclosed what they were, but one of them I know was customer acquisition rates. I do know that, and I have tried to find those over and over again, but haven't been able to. But I would challenge somebody to go out and look at them. But he was one of the first ones that advocated using KPDs, and flat out said, this is how I run my company. And it was so foreign to individuals at that point in time that they thought that he had lost his mind, but clearly he had not. And now we tend to look at this and think of this as kind of a cool thing. But if anybody finds it, I would love to know. But I've looked, I didn't look again this time to put this together, but I have looked multiple times and I can't find it. I also can't Warren Buffett uses. They just talk about it, but they don't give his list. What I do have are page after page of smaller companies and what they use, but a lot of times I don't think they're necessarily relevant, because smaller businesses are so unique that it will work for them, but it may not work for someone else. All right, we are about out of time as well. Good question, though. Very good question. We're looking at this line, this internal processes line. Where this all kind of comes in play in the formalized world is people do what are called balanced scorecards. And this is just an example of a balanced scorecard where you're looking at all of these different pieces together. You're looking at your internal processes, your customers, your financial and your organizational capacity. And then you're looking at it across what are the KPIs that I'm going to use, then what are the targets, again, that are in place, and then what projects are going to come out of this. And you'll notice the projects are running as a summation across all of these different things. And again, it's just how do you actually put it into some sort of tangible so that you can actually use it in a better way. And a lot of people like balanced scorecard. Personally, they don't do a lot for me. I think it's just, I mean, I think they're good. Don't get me wrong. I should not say that. Balanced scorecards are very, very good. But I honestly think that you can literally do what we just talked about that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett do. They come in with just a list of numbers every morning that they have, that they review, that they can then know this is what's happening. And it allows them to hone in on where the issues of the day are or the issues of the week are. Now, do they do a lot of strategic planning that's much more in depth? Do they pour over the numbers at some point in time? Yes, they do. But again, those KPDs, and I go back to the restaurant example because again, everybody can understand. I tangibly can tell on a day-to-day basis how I am doing and just pay attention to one number. One number. Literally, everything can be boiled down to one number, and that is buns in seats. And then, like I said, everything else drives off of that, but that is the number. So if you can figure out that one or two driver number for your business, then you can immediately figure out how to run that business on a more efficient and effective note and for profitability. Okay. All right. So I just always put a summary slide in. My comment is think of it as if you're in a car driving down the highway. I don't know how to describe that. And you feel the wind and you kind of have a sense of how fast you're going by, how fast the wind is blowing in your hair and whatnot. And you know that that wind is coming because you're driving at a certain speed. So if you're looking upstream then, if you're paying attention to the future and being proactive in this, you know that if you slow down, that wind is not going to be pushing against you quite as much. You just know that. It's an inherent sort of thing. There's actually a thing called the Beaufort Wind Index that sailors, if any of you are sailors, use, that uses this. It's a KPD all day long because it is something that can foretell what's happening. And in this case, how fast the wind's blowing is how fast the ship's going to go. But there's not something to tell you, hi, I'm a wind and I'm 8 miles an hour. You just inherently learn this and know this. And that's the same thing with these guys. They basically are just going to give you the ability to foretell what's going on in a much better, much more efficient way. And so I liken it again, oops, went too far, let me back up. I liken it again to the captain of the ship, who just because he knew was able to then determine how fast he was going just by the feel of the wind. And if you've never worked or never read anything about the Beaufort Wind Index, I would tell you just to take a few minutes to read that and the philosophy behind it, because it's very much what we've talked about today. It's very much this way of looking upstream and looking at what's coming rather than what's been. Now we use our trends and we use our data from a historical standpoint to get that trending piece of the puzzle so we can tell things over time. But we don't obsess about a single individual number. We look at it in the whole rather than in the singular. And if you start doing that, I think you will find that things will go much better for you. You'll be able to sleep. You'll be able to know that you're making good, solid, informed decisions. And you'll just get very intuitive at feeling, which I know sounds crazy from someone who's coming from an analytical financial background and is talking about strategy. And I am not saying gut feel. That's a different thing. But this is that ability to look at these numbers and then know what that means on a much more macro level. Okay? So I encourage you to go to the trouble to experiment, to get that crystal ball out, to try to play with these, and you won't get it right the first time. I'll be absolutely honest with you. If you do, that's fabulous. But most businesses go through probably 3 to 6 months of trying different KPDs to see which one is actually going to give them what they want. And then, even after that, deciding what the KPIs are, your metric that you can actually look at, it's going to give you the data that you need to have. So hopefully this will help you some in actually doing operational strategies that are good for your business. All right, we've got just a couple minutes left, actually, and I'm more than happy to field questions if anyone has a question today. All right, no questions. All right, well, I thank you all for coming very much. And if you need to reach out to me, Brandy can help you do that at some point in time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mary Lou, so much for your presentation, and thank you for everyone that was able to join us. As I mentioned, we did record this webinar, so we'll post it on our YouTube channel in the next week or so, so that you can revisit this presentation, or feel free to share it with anyone else that you think could really benefit from it. So thank you all again, and have a great day.